David started out so strong, a humble shepherd who protected his flock from lions with his trusty sling and faith in the Lord, a gifted poet whose voice charmed the court, the hero who killed the great Goliath, tactician, general, peacemaker, the second king of Israel. Then he had to go mess it all up by raping a woman and murdering her husband, which I'd say is surprising if this wasn't so representative of powerful men. Let me recap the story thus far. After he saw Bathsheba bathing on her roof, King David ordered her to sleep with him, got her pregnant, then tried to cover up the affair, culminating in him murdering her husband so that he could take Bathsheba as his bride, successfully hiding the scandal of her pregnancy. Well, from everyone but God. When you spend all day looking down from your palace, it's hard to remember the true king looking down at you. So God sent the prophet Nathan to pay the good king a visit. He told David, "In a town there is a rich man and a poor man. The rich man owns flocks of sheep, while the poor man has but one little lamb. The poor man loves his lamb like a daughter. He feeds it from what little he has. He gives to it to drink from his own supply. He sleeps with it." That last bit sounds a bit weird to modern audiences. Then again, our family dog owns my brother's bed, so. A traveler comes to visit the rich man. Now, according to the holy rules of hospitality, the rich man had to make a feast for the traveler. But he didn't want to kill one of his own sheep for it. So he took the poor man's lamb and killed her instead. All in all, pretty scummy. And David agrees. "As the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves to die. He shall restore the lamb fourfold." But then Nathan reveals the dramatic twist. "You are that man." I imagine the skies darkening, thunder rolling overhead. I imagine David falling to his knees. All that he did in the dark, all his clever maneuverings, all is laid bare. The king is a small, frightened man facing an infinite God. None of that is in the scripture. But such an explosive saying deserves an explosive setting, doesn't it? Well, maybe not. Explosive settings can make it seem like these lessons are restricted to explosive situations, great kings committing great sins. But prophets rarely knock on my door. I've never murdered a man to cover up an affair. So, assuming I pass that very low bar, is there anything I can take away from this story? Well, I wouldn't be here talking your ear off if I didn't think so. Here's my wager. Nathan isn't just saying rich man bad, poor man good. Instead, Nathan's parable shows us two fundamentally different types of relationships. One exemplified by the rich man in David, the other by the poor man in Uriah. These different kinds of relationships also exist in our own lives and our society. So if we understand them, we can better live out the kingdom of God. Let's start with the rich man. What is his relationship to his sheep like? Well, he has a bunch of them. Flocks and flocks and flocks. Despite this, he doesn't want to sacrifice even just one to fulfill his obligations of hospitality. That tiny loss is too much for him. So I'll say that this relationship has two main characteristics. First, he sees his sheep as interchangeable. Since there are so many, he doesn't have a personal relationship to each individual sheep. Instead, he cares about the sheep as a portfolio, a number in a ledger. Second, he sees his sheep portfolio as an instrument. They serve him and his purposes. That is the extent of their value. In this case, the sheep serve the purpose of making him the rich man, interchangeable and instrumental. This is what I'll call a commodity relationship. A commodity is something that you treat in a way that only serves your purposes. In this relationship, you don't value the thing itself, only what it can do for you. You could swap it out and it wouldn't matter as long as it performs the same. Take my laptop or this camera. I don't care about them specifically, I just care about what they can do for me. Give me a better option and I'll swap them out in an instant. So, for the rich man, when the sheep stop being profitable, mutton for dinner. But he will rather murder his neighbor's darling than take a loss. To him, they are all just playing pieces in the game of desire. The poor man not only has fewer sheep than the rich man, but but he also treats his lamb differently. To him, the lamb is not just a means of growing wealth, she is his daughter. True, the lamb is useful, but he loves her beyond her uses, as an end in herself. If one night you swapped his lamb out, he would notice and he would care and he would mourn. The rich man treats his flocks as commodities, but the poor man treats his lamb with love. And love is the opposite of a commodity. Love is specific. Love ain't a stir fry, you can't just put in a substitute. If my dog ran away, bringing me a new dog won't solve the problem. The individual dog matters to me. The rich man doesn't care about sheep number 231, but the poor man loves his lamb in particular. Love is sacrificial. The rich man's sheep exist to fulfill his desires. They are tools. The poor man sees his lamb as someone to care for. He could have given her scraps to eat and had her sleep outside, but instead he fed her his own food and drink. He shared his bed with her. Instrumentally, his kindness is insane. It is cost without profit. But when you see a starving mother feed her child, that's not because of a rational economic calculation. It's because of love. When we love someone, we want their happiness for their own sake, just as we want our happiness for our own sake. Commodities, interchangeable and instrumental. Love, specific and sacrificial. The first, something exists underneath you, it serves you. The second, something exists above you. It is useful, but it is so much more than that. I'm with my fiance not only because she helps me film these videos and cleans the house once in a while, but just because I love her and I want to make her happy. It's that simple. I have defined two types of relationship, commodity and love. But how does this framework help us? Well, it shows that this story isn't just about someone with a lot taking from someone with very little. It is also about why someone who has so much still wants more. Why did King David take Bathsheba? Well, because he wants her. I know, obviously, people do things they want to do. Brilliant insight, Torin. But my point is that desires don't just appear out of nowhere. Our beliefs, our circumstances, our peers all shape what we want. So if any of those are dysfunctional, our desires might also become dysfunctional. Further, we choose whether or not to act on our desires. What we do with our desires, the choices we make, that's morality. And humans, as moral creatures, will often act against their direct desire. So saying he took her because he wants her means that a break happened on two levels. His desires have been shaped in dysfunctional ways, and his morals did not prevent his evil actions. Nathan shows that the root of both of these breaks is David's toxic mindset. He sees people as commodities to use instead of beings to love. Compare David the shepherd to David the king. David started out as a poor man, risking his life to protect his sheep from lions. Then David served everyone by serving God. His eyes were righteous, even during war. Pre-King David would never have taken something just because he desired it. I'd go even further and say that it would not have occurred to him to desire a married woman. He loved God, and so he tried to shape his desires to match God's desires. But then David became king, and this faithful servant transformed into a tyrannical ruler. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Kings have absolute power, but the power of ultimate unconstrained decision, that separates them from their subjects. It's easy to forget the humanity of the individual when commanding 10,000. At that scale, people are interchangeable. What difference is there between one soldier and another? People are instrumental. A soldier exists to follow orders and serve the state. Thus, they are commodities. And that is a necessary mindset when commanding armies. You can't always be caring about the individual soldier. But even that has to remain rooted in love and in morality. But moral constraints on our desires and decisions, that arises from our specific loving relationships with God and with others. Without these limits, without someone to stand against you and demand your care, it is easy to fall into desirous mindsets. So King David starts to treat all of his subjects as commodities, even when that's unnecessary. No, they serve him now, his desires and his wishes. He didn't care that some of his most loyal soldiers died in his plot to kill Uriah. Avoiding scandal meant more to him than many men's lives. Soldiers die, but his reputation must remain untarnished. Love has left the building. Commodification has infected his eyes. It seems no accident that the backdrop of the story is a war where hundreds of men died in David's name while he slept with their wives. So Nathan does not just show that taking Bathsheba and killing Uriah was evil. Nathan also shows that kingship has corrupted David. Where he once looked with love, now he only sees commodities. And so, corrupted by bad eyes, Bathsheba stops being a unique, infinitely complex person to love and respect, but just a beautiful woman that David desires. Interchangeable, instrumental commodity. Commodification says everything is mine, or soon should be, and everyone sees the world like this. We're in a race to gobble up all we can while everyone else does the same. If I don't take his lamb, he'll take mine. Or he would if he could, so it's all just the same. If he loses out, too bad. He wasn't playing the game well enough. Once we start turning people into competitors like this, it is easy to lose track of the human tragedies that our desires cause. We start thinking more about how best to enrich ourselves and less about how to treat others. But if there is one thing the Bible is clear about, it is this: the earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and all who live in it. We are merely stewards of the world. While it is sometimes necessary to see things as commodities, commodification is just categorically untrue. We don't really own anything. Nothing is meant to serve only us. God created everything for the purpose of love. Ownership is a useful concept to help organize a society, but it is idolatry to take it as self-evident. Some things just shouldn't be understood as a commodity. For example, people. While a certain amount of instrumentality is efficient, when taken as a principle, commodification leads to abusing those under one's control, squeezing out as much profit as possible without a care for their welfare. That's certainly not loving your neighbor, but the case I'd like to finish this video on is housing and homelessness. First, let me be clear that homelessness isn't a problem of supply. There are more empty houses than individual homeless people in Canada. The problem is with how we see housing, as a commodity. As a social system, we treat homes as interchangeable and instrumental. The system is designed for some people to own many homes and extract profit from them. In practice, this means that those who have much get richer off the back of those who have very little. Our social structure enables King David. So while Canada affirms the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which says that housing is a universal human right, in practice, we treat it as just another commodity. But commodification is a completely dysfunctional way of seeing housing, because on the ground, no one sees their own home as a commodity. Think of all the things you have attached to your home. It is useful, but it is also sentimental. It holds probably years of memories, loud family dinners, late night board games, silly arguments over the dishes. Our homes are specific and something that we often sacrifice for. And just as importantly, they are necessary to our well-being and that of those we love. So this isn't only a problem for the homeless. Our dysfunctional way of viewing housing as a commodity to be bought and sold, to enrich, that affects everyone. Massive corporations and trade groups buy houses as an investment, banking on its safety and consistent rise in prices. This decreases the supply of homes available for purchase, which makes housing prices soar. That prices out actual people in the community. Since economically we treat housing as just another commodity, there are necessarily going to be people who can't afford to get in the market. And even for those who can, The incentive for landlords and sellers is to charge as much as they possibly can. That then eats into everyone else's income, pushing many to choose between their children's food and their home. It keeps people in abusive households since they can't afford to move out. It keeps people in dangerous jobs without being able to lobby for their rights, since they can't afford to live without these terrible jobs. And obviously, treating housing as a commodity means that there will be people who have to go without. And that is simply monstrous. But what would happen if we looked at housing with eyes of love? What if we started from the position that each not only needs but deserves a home because we are all created in the image of God? What if we stopped seeing housing as an investment, but something holy, set aside for the purposes of God and His love? I'm not suggesting any specific solution. That is way beyond the scope of this video. But I know this. Any solution must start with love, because that is how God sees the world.